Do you ever feel like you're wearing a mask, presenting a carefully curated version of yourself to the world while battling a storm of conflicting thoughts and desires within? What if embracing those darker impulses, the ones society tells you to suppress, could actually be a path to a strange kind of freedom? But what if society, in its attempt to control these impulses, actually misunderstands them, making the problem far worse? Today, we're diving into Fyodor Dostoyevsky's Notes from Underground, a profound exploration of this very inner conflict. Writing in 19th century Russia, a time of immense social and intellectual upheaval, Dostoyevsky captured the mindset of a man rebelling against the rising tide of rationalism and utopian ideals, where logic and reason were held as the highest virtues. This philosophical and political environment proposed the idea that humanity can be perfected through social planning. Dostoyevsky challenged these assumptions. He delved into the uncomfortable truth that human beings are not always rational actors, and that suffering, paradoxically, can be preferable to a life lived solely by the cold light of reason. This wasn't just a historical critique. It was a stark portrayal of the human condition, one that continues to resonate deeply today, perhaps even more so than in Dostoyevsky's time. In this video, we're going to dissect Dostoyevsky's groundbreaking ideas to offer you a deeper understanding of the darker aspects of human nature and your own inner, underground man. We'll reveal hidden truths about self-destructive tendencies, the alluring nature of rebellion against societal expectations, and the inherent limitations of relying solely on pure rationality. Prepare to explore practical strategies for navigating these complex and often contradictory impulses, learning to live more authentically by acknowledging and understanding the full spectrum of your being, both light and dark. And here's the most fascinating part. We'll explore how embracing these darker elements, when understood and managed properly, can paradoxically lead to greater self-acceptance and a more fulfilling life. Now, exploring the darker aspects of human nature can be an uncomfortable and even unsettling endeavor. You might be thinking, why would I want to delve into these negative impulses? It's a valid question, and it's natural to feel some trepidation. Many of us are taught from a young age to suppress our negative emotions and impulses, to present a positive image to the world, and to strive for an idealized version of ourselves. But Dostoyevsky suggests that suppressing these aspects of ourselves can actually be more harmful than confronting them. So let's delve deeper into the unsettling world of the underground man and see what uncomfortable truths we can uncover. Is it possible that the very thing we value most, our ability to make our own choices, is also the source of our greatest misery? What if the freedom to choose, without the constraints of reason or societal norms, leads not to liberation, but to a descent into self-destruction? This is the unsettling question that Dostoyevsky grapples with in Notes from Underground, and it's a question that continues to challenge our understanding of human nature today. We've established that humans aren't always rational, often acting against their own best interests. Now, let's delve deeper into the why behind this inherent irrationality, and how it relates to the underground man's defiance of logic. The central claim that humans are not always rational actors demands a closer look. Irrationality, in this context, isn't simply about making mistakes or lacking information. It's about acting against one's own perceived self-interest, even when the logical course of action is clear. Think of it as an internal rebellion against the tyranny of reason. Emotions, desires, and unconscious motivations often hijack our thought processes, leading us down paths that reason would never dictate. This is where the concept of willfulness comes into play. The underground man embodies this willfulness, choosing to spite himself and others rather than accepting logical solutions. Dostoyevsky suggests that humans value freedom and self-determination even more than happiness or well-being. We crave the ability to chart our own course, even if it leads to suffering, because it affirms our sense of individuality and autonomy. It's as though the underground man is saying, I may be miserable, but at least I'm miserable on my own terms. What could be the implications of this radical freedom? Consider the underground man's spiteful actions throughout the novella. He deliberately sabotages his own attempts to integrate into society, isolates himself from potential friends, and lashes out at those who offer him kindness. These actions are not logical, nor do they bring him happiness. Instead, they seem designed to inflict pain on himself and others. Now, contrast this with real-world examples. The impulsive shopper who racks up crippling debt, the addict who continues to use despite knowing the devastating consequences, the procrastinator who sabotages their own success by putting things off until the last minute. What's driving these behaviors? Often, it's a complex interplay of immediate gratification, emotional avoidance, and a deep-seated need for control. The impulsive shopper seeks a temporary dopamine rush, the addict numbs emotional pain, and the procrastinator asserts control over their own time, even if it means sacrificing long-term goals. It's as though we're constantly battling ourselves, with reason and logic vying for control against the primal forces of emotion and desire. Why are humans so prone to irrationality? Perhaps it's because rationality, in its purest form, is inherently limiting. Societal expectations and norms often push us to conform, to suppress our individuality, and to prioritize the collective good over our own desires. Irrationality, in this sense, can be a form of rebellion, a way of asserting our unique identity in a world that often tries to mold us into something we're not. But what are the implications of this for our personal lives? If we constantly act against our own best interests, we risk damaging our relationships, derailing our careers, and undermining our overall well-being. This is the tragic paradox of the underground man. His relentless pursuit of freedom and self-determination leads him to a state of profound isolation and misery. Have you ever acted against your own best interests? Why did you do it? What were you trying to achieve? What does the answer to that question reveal about your own inner underground man? As we continue, we must consider the implications of irrationality. What does this mean for our well-being? If humans aren't always rational and sometimes act against their own interests, what's the appeal of suffering? If irrationality is a key component of the human condition, then perhaps it's not surprising that some people seem drawn to suffering. Is it possible that masochism and self-destruction are not aberrations, but rather deeply ingrained aspects of human nature? The underground man certainly seems to revel in his own misery, constantly criticizing himself, isolating himself from others, and sabotaging any chance of happiness. But is this simply a character flaw, or does it reflect something more universal about the human experience? Let's consider why suffering has such a powerful allure. The allure of suffering is not about enjoying physical pain, but about psychological self-flagellation and wallowing. Masochism, in this context, is not about sexual pleasure derived from pain, but about a deeper need for self-punishment. It can stem from feelings of guilt, shame, or unworthiness. Suffering can provide a twisted sense of identity, a way of defining oneself through hardship and struggle. It can also provide a sense of purpose, a reason to exist, even if that reason is rooted in negativity. Think of the person who constantly complains about their problems, but resists any attempts to solve them. They may be unconsciously clinging to their suffering because it gives them a sense of importance and attention. Suffering can also provide a sense of control, particularly for those who feel powerless in other areas of their lives. By inflicting pain on themselves, they can at least feel like they are in charge of their own fate. And yet, this is an illusion. The underground man believes he is controlling his own suffering, when in reality, it is controlling him. The underground man's constant self-criticism is a prime example of this self-destructive tendency. He berates himself for his flaws, obsesses over his perceived inadequacies, and wallows in feelings of self-loathing. He is also isolated from others, unable to form meaningful relationships because he fears vulnerability and rejection. What about modern examples? Consider unhealthy relationship patterns, where individuals repeatedly choose partners who mistreat them, or the person who constantly resists help from others, clinging to victimhood narratives as a way of avoiding responsibility. Then there is self-harm, a more extreme manifestation of this impulse. Psychological research on attachment styles and trauma can shed light on these behaviors, suggesting that early experiences of abuse or neglect can lead to a lifelong pattern of seeking out or inflicting pain. The long-term consequences of this behavior are devastating. This type of behavior is ultimately self-defeating and prevents personal growth. Living in the role of victim becomes a way to avoid taking responsibility for one's own life and to avoid making difficult choices. The underground man's suffering becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, trapping him in a cycle of misery and despair. What is necessary to break free from these patterns? Seeking help is crucial. Therapy, support groups, and self-compassion practices can all provide tools for healing and growth. But the first step is recognizing the allure of suffering and acknowledging that it is not a path to fulfillment. Are you drawn to unhealthy relationships or situations? What benefits do you get from suffering? Is there another way to meet those needs without sacrificing your own well-being? And now, we arrive at a critical juncture. If people seek suffering, what does that mean for social harmony? Is it possible that rejecting societal norms makes things worse or better? Now, let's delve deeper into the underground man's rejection of societal norms and authority. His disdain for social gatherings, his criticism of utopian ideals, and his refusal to conform to societal expectations are all manifestations of his rebellious spirit. But is this rebellion justified, or is it simply a form of self-sabotage disguised as intellectual superiority? Let's explore the complex relationship between the individual and society, and the allure of living outside the bounds of convention. What exactly are societal norms and authority? They are the unwritten rules and established power structures that govern our behavior and maintain social order. While necessary for a functioning society, they can also be restrictive and oppressive, stifling individuality and perpetuating injustice. Rebellion, in this context, is a response to these restrictions, a way of asserting one's autonomy and challenging the status quo. However, it's crucial to distinguish between healthy skepticism and destructive nihilism. Healthy skepticism involves questioning authority and challenging norms with the goal of creating positive change, while destructive nihilism simply rejects everything without offering any constructive alternatives. The underground man often teeters on the edge of nihilism, rejecting societal values without offering a clear vision of what should replace them. Is there something else to the story? Anti-establishment movements, skepticism towards experts, distrust of institutions, and the rise of conspiracy theories are all modern echoes of the underground man's rejection of societal norms. Why is this? The desire for autonomy, a need to question authority, and a rejection of perceived hypocrisy are all key psychological motivations behind these behaviors. In a world where information is readily available, and institutions are often seen as corrupt or ineffective, it's natural to question the narratives we're being told. But what are the consequences of this widespread distrust? When we reject all forms of authority, we risk descending into chaos and isolation. The rise of conspiracy theories, for example, can lead to a rejection of science, a distrust of media, and a breakdown of social cohesion. Is this truly freedom? Is this something that can last? Rejecting societal norms can lead to increased creativity and innovation, as individuals are freed from the constraints of conventional thinking. But it can also lead to isolation and alienation, as individuals struggle to find a sense of belonging in a world that doesn't share their values. What's crucial to recognize is the importance of finding a balance between individuality and social responsibility. We must be willing to question authority and challenge norms, but we must also be willing to engage in constructive dialogue and work towards creating a more just and equitable society. Do you tend to conform to societal expectations or rebel against them? What are the consequences of your choices? What does the answer to that question reveal about your own relationship with authority and conformity? As we approach the next step, we must keep the journey going. If rejecting social norms is freeing, what happens if people can choose anything they want? What if they are totally free? Now, let's turn to the problem of free will, which Dostoyevsky attacks as a source of problems for the underground man. Is free will really the boon that we believe it to be? Or does unlimited freedom lead to chaos and suffering? This is where Dostoyevsky's critique becomes truly unsettling, challenging our most deeply held assumptions about human nature and the good life. But is it something that we actually want? Free will, in the context of existentialism, is the idea that we are ultimately responsible for our own choices and actions. There is no predetermined path, no divine plan, no external force dictating our fate. We are free to choose who we want to be, what we want to do, and how we want to live our lives. This freedom is often seen as a positive thing, a source of empowerment and potential. Dostoyevsky, however, takes a contrarian view. He suggests that too much freedom can be paralyzing, leading to anxiety, uncertainty, and ultimately self-destruction. The underground man is a prime example of this. He is free to choose his own path, but he lacks the inner compass to guide him. He is adrift in a sea of possibilities, unable to commit to anything, and ultimately consumed by his own sense of meaninglessness. The result is catastrophic. The underground man acts as though he is compelled to make things worse for himself. Think of the episode with Lisa, the prostitute he attempts to save. He has the freedom to treat her with kindness and compassion, to offer her genuine help. Instead, he subjects her to a manipulative and emotionally abusive tirade, driving her away and solidifying his own isolation. This is not an isolated incident. Throughout the novella, the underground man consistently makes choices that undermine his own happiness and well-being. He seems driven by a perverse desire to prove his own freedom, even if it means sacrificing everything else. But what is the final result? The problem of too much freedom is that, when given the freedom of choice, people tend to make irrational and destructive choices. Absolute freedom is not desirable, and there are situations where it becomes destructive. The question then is, what are the limits of freedom? If a person does not know what is good for them, then can they truly be called free? What does that mean for society? What does that mean for the individual? Now we must consider, where does this take us? Where does it leave us? If rejecting social norms is freeing, what happens if people can choose anything they want? And all of these elements contribute to a much larger issue, the universality of the underground man archetype. If rejecting social norms is freeing and absolute freedom can be destructive, where does that leave humanity? The answer is complicated by the fact that these struggles occur within everyone. The irrationality, allure of suffering, rejection of norms, and problems with free will are simply expressions of this archetype within us all. It's not about excusing bad behavior. Rather, it's about understanding its roots. The underground man is a universal archetype. We all have a shadow self, a repository of repressed desires, negative emotions, and socially unacceptable impulses. Jungian psychology describes the shadow as the unconscious side of the personality. It includes everything we deem unacceptable about ourselves: our anger, greed, envy, and selfishness. These impulses can manifest subtly or overtly, depending on individual circumstances and coping mechanisms. Sometimes it comes out as a stray thought. Sometimes it comes out as a deliberate action. But it is almost always present. If we believe that we are purely good, then we are not being realistic. We must then ask, what is to be done about our darker side? This archetype manifests in many ways in everyday life. Consider passive-aggressive behavior, where resentment simmers beneath a veneer of politeness. Or the subtle jabs and criticisms directed towards those who achieve success, fueled by envy and insecurity. The internet is a breeding ground for the underground man, with online trolling and harassment providing an outlet for repressed anger and aggression. Social media addiction, driven by the need for validation, reflects a deep-seated insecurity and a hunger for external approval. Even seemingly harmless self-destructive habits, like procrastination or impulsive spending, can be seen as manifestations of this darker side. Contrast the seemingly good person with their hidden flaws and impulses, highlighting the gap between outward appearances and inner realities. What are the qualities that they hide? What do they refuse to admit about themselves? Why do we see this gap? Why is this archetype so pervasive? It's a natural consequence of living in a complex and often contradictory society. Societal pressures, moral expectations, and repressed emotions all contribute to the development of the underground man within us. As children, we are taught to suppress certain emotions and behaviors, to conform to societal expectations, and to prioritize the needs of others over our own. This creates a reservoir of repressed desires and negative emotions that can fester and grow over time. What happens to these emotions? They don't simply disappear. They go underground, where they can exert a powerful influence on our thoughts and behaviors. In what ways do you see the underground man manifesting in your own life? What are your own shadow impulses? Are you willing to admit them, or do you try to keep them hidden, even from yourself? If the underground man exists in everyone, what happens when we try to ignore or suppress these darker impulses? Is it possible that denial makes things worse? Let's consider the dangers of suppression and the importance of integration. Suppressing or denying the underground man can lead to significant psychological problems and destructive behaviors. This is evident in the underground man's self-loathing and his inability to form meaningful relationships. His constant self-criticism, his paranoia, and his inability to trust others are all consequences of his repressed emotions and his denial of his own darker impulses. Repression is a psychological defense mechanism where unwanted thoughts, feelings, or impulses are pushed out of conscious awareness. While it may provide temporary relief from anxiety or discomfort, it can have serious long-term consequences. Anxiety, depression, and the eruption of repressed impulses in unhealthy ways are just some of the potential outcomes. Self-awareness and self-acceptance are crucial means of integrating the shadow self. When we are aware of our darker impulses, we can manage them more effectively and prevent them from controlling our lives. Suppressing the underground man can lead to destructive outcomes like addiction, violence, and social isolation. Consider the addict who tries to numb their pain with drugs or alcohol, only to find themselves trapped in a cycle of dependency and self-destruction. Or the individual who lashes out in anger, unable to control their impulses, and damaging their relationships in the process. Look at history. Individuals and societies that deny their darker impulses are doomed to repeat them. Consider the atrocities committed in the name of ideological purity, where entire groups of people were demonized and dehumanized. What were the psychological underpinnings of these events? Self-compassion is crucial. Psychological research consistently demonstrates the benefits of self-compassion and emotional regulation. Can we overcome this? Acknowledging and integrating the underground man, within us allows us to manage our darker impulses more effectively and prevent them from controlling our lives. By understanding our own capacity for cruelty, selfishness, and irrationality, we can develop greater empathy and compassion for others. What does that mean? Self-forgiveness is essential to accepting ourselves. The ability to accept ourselves with all our flaws and imperfections is a key component of psychological well-being. What are you afraid to admit about yourself? What aspects of your personality do you try to suppress? If suppression is bad, what happens when we amplify these destructive qualities with anonymity and social media? Let's turn to how the internet and social media amplify the underground man archetype. The internet and social media provide fertile ground for the expression and amplification of the underground man archetype. The anonymity and lack of accountability that characterize online interactions embolden individuals to express their darkest impulses without fear of consequences. Social media algorithms, echo chambers, and the pressure to project a perfect image can further exacerbate the darker aspects of human nature. The internet becomes a hall of mirrors, reflecting back our own insecurities and amplifying our worst tendencies. What are the consequences? Social media algorithms create echo chambers, where individuals are only exposed to information and opinions that confirm their existing beliefs. This can lead to increased polarization and a dehumanization of those who hold opposing views. The pressure to project a perfect image online can lead to feelings of inadequacy and a constant need for validation, fueling a cycle of self-criticism and comparison. What happens? The online disinhibition effect allows people to say and do things online that they would never do in person. Cyberbullying, hate speech, the spread of misinformation, and the glorification of violence are all manifestations of this phenomenon. The internet can feel like a playground for bullies and sociopaths. Are the consequences worth the freedom? Consider the real-world consequences. Individuals who have been radicalized online, driven to commit acts of violence by extremist ideologies. Or those who have been victimized by cyberbullying and online harassment, suffering from anxiety, depression, and even suicide. The internet is not simply a neutral tool. It is a powerful amplifier of human nature, for better or for worse. Sociological research consistently shows the impact of social media on mental health and social behavior. It can connect us to others around the world, provide access to information, and facilitate social movements for positive change. But it can also isolate us, spread misinformation, and amplify our darkest impulses. How does social media affect your own behavior and emotions? Have you ever witnessed or participated in online harassment or negativity? If the internet amplifies the worst in us, is there a way to fight back? How can people overcome this? We can manage the underground man and integrate the shadow self. By cultivating self-awareness, self-compassion, and a commitment to personal growth, we can learn to tame our inner demons and lead more fulfilling lives. Self-awareness is the foundation. Understand your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Only by recognizing our darker impulses can we begin to manage them. Journaling, meditation, and therapy can all be valuable tools for cultivating self-awareness. It also requires self-compassion. Treat yourself with kindness and understanding, especially when you make mistakes or struggle with difficult emotions. Remember that everyone is imperfect. Specific techniques are useful. Journaling can provide a safe space to explore your thoughts and feelings without judgment. Meditation can help you become more aware of your thoughts and emotions as they arise, without getting carried away by them. Therapy can provide a supportive and confidential environment to explore your past experiences and develop healthier coping mechanisms. Creative expression can be a powerful way to channel your emotions and express your authentic self. Consider the value of meaningful relationships. Connecting with others in a genuine and vulnerable way can provide a sense of belonging and support. Do these really work? These strategies have helped countless individuals overcome self-destructive behaviors and lead more fulfilling lives. Personal anecdotes, case studies, and psychological research all support the benefits of mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, and other therapeutic interventions. But these are not quick fixes. They require commitment, patience, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves. However, the rewards are immense. You can improve your life. Integrating the shadow self leads to greater self-acceptance, improved relationships, and a more authentic and meaningful life. When we accept ourselves with all our flaws and imperfections, we free ourselves from the burden of self-criticism and self-loathing. This allows us to connect with others on a deeper level and to live in alignment with our values. How will you contribute to a world where goodness prevails over darkness? By understanding Dostoyevsky's lessons, we can learn to face our inner demons. Now, let's talk about key takeaways. If the internet amplifies the worst in us, how can we fight back against the manipulation and misinformation? Overcoming the negative influences of the internet requires cultivating critical thinking and media literacy. This is a crucial step in managing the underground man archetype within ourselves and preventing it from being exploited by external forces. We need to actively resist the manipulation and misinformation that seeks to control our thoughts and behaviors. Are you ready to fight back? The viewer needs to recognize that algorithms are designed to manipulate people into wanting what those very algorithms want them to want. What does it mean to cultivate critical thinking and media literacy in this context? Critical thinking in the digital age means questioning the sources of information, identifying biases, and evaluating evidence before accepting it as truth. Media literacy involves understanding how different types of media are created, distributed, and consumed, as well as recognizing the techniques used to persuade and manipulate audiences. It also means understanding the different types of misinformation and disinformation that circulate online, from fake news and conspiracy theories to propaganda and advertising. The first step to media literacy is recognizing that there are bad actors and bad intentions. How can critical thinking be applied to online content? Consider the example of fact-checking news articles. Before sharing an article on social media, take a moment to verify the information by checking multiple sources, examining the author's credentials, and looking for evidence of bias. A healthy dose of skepticism will protect you. Scrutinize social media posts with a critical eye, paying attention to the language used, the images shared, and the comments posted by others. Look for logical fallacies, such as appeals to emotion, ad hominem attacks, and straw man arguments. Consider the real-world example of individuals who have been misled by misinformation, such as those who believe in conspiracy theories or who fall victim to online scams. On the other hand, we have to look to the people who have successfully debunked false claims, such as fact-checkers, journalists, and researchers. How can we be more like them? Cultivating critical thinking and media literacy has profound benefits for individuals and society as a whole. It promotes informed decision-making, preventing manipulation and strengthening democratic values. A society of critical thinkers is a society that is less susceptible to propaganda and authoritarianism. How do you evaluate the information you encounter online? What steps do you take to verify the accuracy of news articles or social media posts? The future of society may hinge on these very questions. If critical thinking is so important, what are some concrete steps we can take to improve our ability to discern truth from falsehood online? What are the real-world applications? If critical thinking is so important, what are some concrete steps we can take to improve our ability to discern truth from falsehood online? There are practical strategies we can use to evaluate online information and protect ourselves from manipulation. These strategies require conscious effort and a willingness to challenge one's own biases. Remember that the algorithm is against you and bad actors want you to believe them. However, we can fight back. Are you ready to explore these strategies? One technique for verifying information online is to check multiple sources. Don't rely on a single news website or social media account. Instead, consult a variety of sources, including reputable news organizations, academic journals, and government reports. Examine the author's credentials. Is the author an expert in the field? Do they have any known biases or affiliations? Look for evidence of bias in the language used, the selection of facts, and the overall tone of the piece. Be aware of your own cognitive biases and confirmation bias, which can lead you to selectively seek out information that confirms your existing beliefs. If you see something online that immediately makes you upset, that may be a clue that you are being manipulated. Is it a real account or a fake account? Consider the real-world scenario of evaluating the credibility of a news website. Before accepting the information presented on a website, take a moment to investigate its ownership, funding, and editorial policies. Does the website have a clear mission statement and code of ethics? Are its sources transparent and verifiable? What other websites link to it? This can be a clue as to the website's veracity. Or consider the real-world scenario of identifying a fake social media account. Look for signs of inauthenticity, such as a lack of personal information, a large number of followers, and a history of posting spam or misinformation. It can be tough to recognize. Debunking a conspiracy theory is another great example. Use fact-checking websites and other resources to expose the flaws in the theory and present evidence that contradicts it. The good news is that there are many resources to help us. Discerning truth from falsehood in the digital age is a constant challenge. What is the role of social media companies, fact-checkers, and educational institutions in promoting media literacy? Social media companies have a responsibility to combat the spread of misinformation on their platforms. Fact-checkers play a vital role in verifying information and debunking false claims. Educational institutions should incorporate media literacy into their curricula, teaching students how to think critically about the information they encounter online. But ultimately, the responsibility lies with each individual to be a discerning consumer of information. What are your go-to strategies for verifying information online? How can you improve your ability to identify fake news and misinformation? How do these lessons apply to Dostoyevsky's ideas, and specifically the underground man? Does he have any guidance? How do these lessons apply to Dostoyevsky's ideas, and specifically the underground man? Dostoyevsky's writings, particularly Notes from Underground, emphasize the importance of individual responsibility in the search for truth. He warns against blindly accepting societal norms and ideologies, encouraging individuals to think for themselves and to question everything. The underground man, despite his flaws, embodies this spirit of rebellion against conformity. Understanding yourself, and not what society wants you to think, is the key. How can we cultivate this spirit in ourselves? Dostoyevsky's characters grapple with questions of truth, meaning, and morality. The concept of existential responsibility, the idea that individuals are responsible for creating their own values and making their own choices in a meaningless world, is extremely important. The underground man, despite his self-destructive tendencies, is ultimately responsible for his own choices and his own suffering. He creates meaning for himself, even if it is a destructive one. Consider how this applies to social media use. Do you create a fake identity for yourself on social media that is more palatable to society? Raskolnikov's justification for murder in Crime and Punishment, Ivan Karamazov's intellectual rebellion in The Brothers Karamazov, and the underground man's rejection of societal norms in Notes from Underground are all examples of how Dostoyevsky's characters struggle with the search for truth. These literary explorations mirror the modern challenge of navigating a world of misinformation and competing narratives. We must create our own answers. We must be responsible for our own choices. Society is not going to do it for us. Dostoyevsky's emphasis on individual responsibility is even more relevant in the digital age. It empowers individuals to take control of their own beliefs and resist manipulation. Use the concept of radical responsibility to show that, although external forces are at play, it is up to the individual to determine what he believes. How does Dostoyevsky's message of individual responsibility resonate with you? How can you apply it to your own life and online behavior? Understanding how this relates back to Dostoyevsky is key. Now, let's discuss the key takeaways from the body of our video. What happens when the rebellion against societal norms, the distrust of institutions, and the embrace of irrationality lead to a complete rejection of meaning itself? This is the dangerous territory of nihilism, a potential consequence of grappling with the underground man. If you're beginning to question everything, how do you avoid falling into the abyss of believing that nothing matters at all? This section will explore nihilism as a tempting, yet ultimately destructive path and then ask, can a person pull themselves out of it? Nihilism, at its core, is the belief that life is without objective meaning, purpose, or intrinsic value. It's a rejection of the idea that there are any ultimate truths, moral principles, or inherent values that give life significance. Existential nihilism denies inherent meaning in the universe. Moral nihilism rejects objective morality. Epistemological nihilism questions the possibility of knowledge. Think of the underground man. His rejection of societal norms, his spiteful nature, and his distrust of reason can easily be interpreted as nihilistic tendencies. But what are the psychological and philosophical roots of this perspective? And why might it appeal to someone struggling with the weight of existence? Is nihilism an easy way out? Nihilism often arises from feelings of alienation, disillusionment, and a loss of faith in traditional values. When individuals feel disconnected from society, disillusioned with the promises of progress, or have lost faith in religion or other belief systems, nihilism can seem like a logical conclusion. It's the ultimate form of skepticism. Consider, for example, characters in literature like Raskolnikov before his redemption in Crime and Punishment, or characters in Samuel Beckett's plays who embrace meaninglessness and absurdity. The art world has Dadaism, which celebrated absurdity. Philosophically, thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche explored the implications of God is dead, leading to a re-evaluation of all values. How does this compare to absurdism, which also acknowledges the lack of inherent meaning? While both nihilism and absurdism grapple with the lack of inherent meaning in the universe, they differ in their responses. Nihilism tends to embrace the void, leading to despair or apathy. Absurdism, on the other hand, acknowledges the conflict between our desire for meaning and the universe's indifference, but encourages us to rebel against this absurdity by creating our own meaning. Albert Camus, for example, in the myth of Sisyphus, argues that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, finding joy in the act of pushing the boulder, even though it's ultimately pointless. Does the underground man embrace nihilism or absurdism? Or does he exist in a state of tormented uncertainty between the two? What, then, is the appeal of nihilism? Why might someone be drawn to the belief that nothing matters? In times of social and political upheaval, when old values are crumbling and the future seems uncertain, nihilism can provide a sense of freedom from responsibility. If nothing truly matters, then there's no need to strive for anything, no need to adhere to any moral code. It can even be used to justify destructive behavior. But what are the potential dangers of this perspective? What happens when an individual or society fully embraces nihilism? Have you ever felt drawn to nihilistic beliefs? What appeals to you about them? What are the potential downsides? If nihilism is a dead end, a bleak and ultimately unsatisfying response to the challenges of existence, is there a way for someone in an underground state of mind to find meaning? Can a person pull themselves out of nihilism? This leads us to a crucial question. If the universe doesn't offer inherent meaning, can individuals create their own? Even in a world that may seem meaningless on the surface, individuals can still create their own meaning and purpose. This is the essence of existential meaning-making, a concept that resonates deeply with Dostoyevsky's later works and his ultimate embrace of faith, love, and compassion. But how does one go about creating meaning in a seemingly meaningless world? What does this process actually look like in practice? And how can it help us overcome the despair and alienation of the underground man? Existential meaning-making is the idea that individuals are responsible for creating their own values and purposes in life. It's a rejection of the notion that meaning is something to be discovered, handed down by a higher power, or dictated by societal norms. Instead, it's a recognition that we have the freedom and the responsibility to define what matters to us and to live in accordance with those values. This involves aligning one's actions with one's values, pursuing meaningful goals, and connecting with something larger than oneself, whether it's a cause, a community, or a sense of spirituality. But can this even be done? Consider the example of volunteering at a homeless shelter. On the surface, it might seem like a small, insignificant action in the face of a massive problem. But for the individual performing that action, it can create a sense of purpose, connection, and meaning. It's a concrete way to align one's values, compassion, empathy with one's actions, and to make a positive difference in the world, however small. Even something small is still something. Or consider the act of creating art. An artist pours their heart and soul into a painting, a sculpture, a piece of music. The act of creation itself can be deeply meaningful, regardless of whether the artwork is ever seen or appreciated by others. But how does this relate to Dostoyevsky's own life and beliefs? Dostoyevsky, after his own period of nihilistic doubt, ultimately found solace in faith, love, and compassion. His later novels, such as The Brothers Karamazov, explore the redemptive power of these values, even in the face of immense suffering. Think of activists fighting for social justice, artists creating beauty in a broken world, and ordinary people making a difference in their communities. A clip of a news story where an activist is making a difference in their community is a great example. Psychologist Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, wrote extensively about the importance of finding meaning even in the most horrific circumstances. How can we apply these lessons to our own lives? By consciously choosing our values, setting meaningful goals, and connecting with something larger than ourselves, we can take control of our lives and overcome the nihilistic tendencies that might otherwise consume us. This can empower individuals to take control of their own lives, overcome nihilism, and find fulfillment. But there's another piece of the puzzle that's essential for taming the underground man: embracing vulnerability and authentic connection. What gives your life meaning and purpose? What are your values? How can you align your actions with your values? How does vulnerability relate to finding meaning? Does vulnerability make it easier or harder to feel fulfilled? This brings us to a critical point. Overcoming the isolation and alienation of the underground man requires us to embrace vulnerability and seek authentic connection with others. Vulnerability, at its simplest, is the willingness to show one's true self, including one's flaws, imperfections, and emotions. It's about letting go of the need to project a perfect image and allowing ourselves to be seen as we truly are, warts and all. However, this can be extremely difficult. It requires courage to be vulnerable. It might be easier to be cynical, but it's necessary for building deeper connections with others, building trust and creating a sense of belonging. To be vulnerable is to allow for criticism. It involves the risk of being hurt. It's about letting down your guard. Think of a character in a movie who shows their imperfections. Showing this scene would demonstrate vulnerability. What happens next? When we're willing to be vulnerable, we create space for others to be vulnerable with us. This fosters a sense of reciprocity and mutual understanding, breaking down the walls of isolation and alienation. An individual sharing their struggles with mental health, activists speaking out against injustice, ordinary people offering support to those in need. The clip of a person speaking up and inspiring a group of people is a great example. But what are the long-term benefits of this approach? Vulnerability isn't easy. It requires courage, self-awareness, and a willingness to risk being hurt. But the rewards are immense. It can lead to greater self-acceptance, improved relationships, and a more meaningful life. It helps you be more honest with yourself. How comfortable are you with being vulnerable? What are you afraid of showing to others? How can you cultivate more authentic connections in your life? If being vulnerable is so good for us, how can we learn to become more vulnerable? Does accepting your flaws help with this? This leads us to our final point. Taming the underground man and living a more fulfilling life requires us to embrace imperfection and cultivate self-compassion. Self-compassion, at its heart, is treating oneself with the same kindness, care, and understanding that one would offer to a friend. It's about recognizing that we're all imperfect, that we all make mistakes, and that we all experience suffering. And instead of beating ourselves up for it, we offer ourselves a gentle and supportive response. It requires that you act as your own friend. Self-compassion involves self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. But what does this look like in practice? Self-kindness involves treating ourselves with warmth and understanding, rather than harsh judgment and self-criticism. Common humanity recognizes that we're all part of a shared human experience, and that our struggles are not unique to us. Mindfulness involves observing our thoughts and emotions without getting carried away by them, allowing us to respond with greater clarity and compassion. One example is how the way you talk to yourself affects your behavior. The research around self-compassion and its benefits shows that it can reduce stress and improve overall well-being. But how does this all come together? Self-compassion helps individuals overcome self-criticism, reduce stress, and improve their overall well-being. Individuals forgiving themselves for past mistakes, accepting their flaws and imperfections, practicing self-care. Dostoyevsky, later in life, believed in the redemptive power of forgiveness. But what are the long-term benefits? Embracing imperfection and cultivating self-compassion can lead to greater self-acceptance, improved relationships, and a more meaningful life. Instead of trying to be perfect, we can focus on being authentic, on living in accordance with our values, and on making a positive difference in the world, however small. How do you typically treat yourself when you make a mistake or experience a setback? How can you cultivate more self-compassion in your life? By combining self-compassion, vulnerability, and a search for meaning, we can overcome the underground man. Now, let's talk about our overall conclusion. As we reach the end of our exploration of Dostoyevsky's notes from Underground, we find ourselves face to face with some unsettling truths about human nature. Throughout this journey, we've navigated the complex terrain of inherent irrationality, the dark allure of suffering, the rebellious rejection of societal norms, the paradoxical challenge of free will, and the uncomfortable universality of the underground man archetype, all while hinting at the possibility of integration and self-acceptance. But what does it all mean? We began by asking, how much is societal pressure to blame for the darkness and suffering we see in the world, and how much lies within ourselves? Understanding the underground man offers some answers, though they may not be the comforting ones we initially sought. It suggests that the seeds of our discontent, our spite, and our self-destructive tendencies reside within us, often hidden beneath layers of social conditioning and self-deception, and understanding them begins with honest introspection. But here's the twist. Simply acknowledging them isn't enough. The ultimate insight, the terrifying truth that Dostoyevsky forces us to confront, is not that humans are inherently evil, but that we are inherently complex, contradictory beings, capable of both immense good and unspeakable evil. It's a recognition that the line between saint and sinner runs through every human heart, including our own. Therefore, the key to a meaningful life isn't to deny our darker impulses, but to cultivate self-awareness, to understand their origins, and to integrate them into a more complete and authentic sense of self. Why is this so difficult to grasp? The implications of this extend far beyond the realm of individual psychology. They speak to the very core of the human condition and the search for meaning in a seemingly meaningless world. In an era defined by social media echo chambers, political polarization, and the constant bombardment of misinformation, Dostoyevsky's insights are more relevant than ever. They challenge us to question the narratives we're told, to resist the urge to demonize those who disagree with us, and to take individual responsibility for our actions and beliefs. How can we promote these ideas in our current culture? Embracing our underground man isn't an excuse for bad behavior or a license to indulge our darkest desires. Rather, it's a path toward self-acceptance, compassion, and a more nuanced understanding of ourselves and others. The journey may be difficult, fraught with uncomfortable truths and painful self-reflection, but it's also incredibly rewarding, leading to a greater sense of wholeness, authenticity, and purpose. Is the difficult path not the most rewarding one? I encourage you to reflect on your own underground man, to explore the hidden corners of your psyche, and to consider how you can better understand and integrate your darker impulses. Consider journaling, meditation, or seeking therapy as potential tools for self-discovery. What are you afraid to face within yourself? The first step to taming your inner demons is acknowledging that they exist. Only then can you begin to integrate them into a more authentic and fulfilling life. Thank you for watching.